Good morning, everybody. Whilst we wait for everybody to log in, I'd like to start off by saying Happy Africa Day to everyone. Just a fun fact, one of South Africa's neighboring countries, Namibia, might surprise you. Now, despite the clear skies both day and night, it's not the kind of place where you'd be reaching for a damp cloth or cooling off in the pool all day. With temperatures typically from 20 to 25 degrees, comfortably mild, perfect for relaxing, or even floating around without the heat getting too intense. So, unlike us, they're pretty warm. Speaking of celebrations, today is National Blueberry Cheesecake Day. So don't forget to treat yourself. And if cheesecake isn't within reach, don't worry, you can always grab an ice cream. Now, I hope you enjoy your day and thank you so much for joining us in today's iTuesday. My name is Yolanda Delaze. I'm an underwriting assistant in the environmental liability division. Now, I'd like to start off today's session with I'd like to start off today's session I'd like to start off today's session with a simple question. When a factory burns down, who pays for the cleanup of the pollution? Who pays the cleanup? Who pays to clean up the pollution? Now, most people instinctively would say the property policy will pay for the loss. The broad form handles any third party claims, but in reality, the biggest cost is often neither property nor liability. It is the environmental cleanup that follows. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Over to you, Shelley.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Yolanda, for the great introduction. I want to start off by setting the scene. So this is very similar to a claim that we have had in the past. And the scene is around a chemical manufacturer who has multiple chemicals stored in flow bins, drums, in palletized containers around their factory, and also outside in the open area. So what started out as a warm day on the Lowveld, where an employee walked past flow bins that were sitting in an open area and noticed that there was some liquid coming out of one of the flow bins. They then called the safety manager, who then looked at it, and they realized that one of the flow bins was leaking. They moved all the flow bins that were around it to get to this flow bin, and the idea was very simple. Just decant the one where the flow bin thing is leaking into a new flow bin. So you stop the spread of the leak. All went well, everything went well until they actually coupled it up. And unfortunately, chemical reactions happened and there was an explosion. This explosion, because there were multiple chemicals in the area, spread into the factory and all the surrounding area. And within a matter of minutes, that whole factory had been burnt down. So I would like to just point out that this would have been a simple cleanup in the initial stages, and that every regulatory precaution was in place to mitigate these types of losses. But unfortunately, this event occurred and chemical reactions happen in everyday life. So yes, so this is the scene that we would like to set. So what started as a chemical spill from a flow bin very quickly became an environmental disaster. So today we're going to unpack broad form liability and environmental liability. In the event, in the instance of this claim, there was a broad form and an environmental liability policy in play. And the idea is really to see, you always automatically think, well, I've got a pollution extension on my general and my broad form liability policy, and that'll cover me for all events. It's quite a nice limit that I've got on there. So it definitely will cover me in the event of having this type of claim. This thinking is quite common. The big loss will sit within the broad form, and the environmental policy is just a very small part that's add on. But that assumption is what we're going to challenge today. So the key question today is, who pays for the cleanup and when do these policies respond? So my portion of today, I'm going to talk about the environmental liability side, and then Alex is going to talk around the general liability side, how that, the broad form policy, how that would respond. And then we will close off with Willie Buitendijk from EFI Global, chatting around from a loss adjuster's side standpoint, what he looks at, where there may be gaps in the cover, and also around regulatory requirements in terms of a claim like this. So the liability policy, the primary response is any release, discharge, or escape of contaminants. And this can be from an underground storage tank, an above ground storage tank, drums, flow bins, anything like that. It doesn't have to be restricted to an underground tank or an above ground tank or a specific storage tank. So in this claim, there was a chemical spill, there was fire water contamination, and this fire water contamination actually came almost a day later because the fire was so hot that no emergency response could get anywhere near the site for the first day. So they came in, did the fire water, try to put out at least the burning cinders that were left. And with this, the chemicals obviously get contaminated in the water and they continue on and sometimes go into third-party property. So in terms of environmental liability policy, the policy pays in a specific way. It will first look at emergency responses to mitigate the spill from going any further. It will then look at on-site cleanup, so first-party cleanup. It'll then look at off-site cleanup. It'll address any defence costs and legal representation that comes through, and then it'll look at the liability from that. So in terms of the claim that we're talking about today, the costs in the early stages already exceeded 2.8 million. And this was in a matter of a month. So some of the bigger costs that we look at is site assessment costs, because in terms of the Regulatory Act, we have to look at assess the site to see where the damages are, and then what remediation and remedial things need to be put in place to assist. So environmental policy is exhausted almost immediately if the limits aren't adequate. So in closing, I'd like to say regulatory requires you to act immediately. Cleanup is your legal obligation. So as the insured, he doesn't have a choice. He needs to act as if this claim was his own, on his own balance sheet, while he's waiting for the necessary policies to respond. Because in terms of the National Environmental Management Act, you have a duty of care. So yes, over to Alex.
Thank you, Shirley, and good morning again to everyone. Now let's shift our focus to broad form liability, because this is where a lot of expectations don't really match a reality. When something like this happens, the instinct is often, surely the liability policy will pick this up. But broad form liability policy is designed for a very specific role. It covers legal liability to third parties, meaning it only responds when a third party suffers damage and the insured is legally liable. Now, based on our current case study, pollution also adds another layer to it. Under the broad form liability policy, pollution is generally excluded unless it's sudden or accidental. So that allows broad form to respond, but only in a limited and specific way. So in practice, broad form liability may assist where there is a risk of damage spreading to third parties or where action is needed to contain or mitigate the spread. So essentially, broad form liability doesn't take over the cleanup. It may support where the third party exposure exists. An important question that we should ask ourselves is that, what if there's no third party damage yet, but there is a real risk that pollution could spread? In terms of the policy would respond to contain the spill, prevent further spread, or protect neighboring property. And this is where broad form does not respond as a cleanup policy, but as a way to mitigate potential third-party liability. In many cases, when people hear pollution extension or cleanup costs, the assumption is often that broad form liability covers the entire cleanup. But in reality, Broadform remains primarily focused on third-party impact and generally excludes damage to the insured's own land or premises. So, damage to neighboring property and spray beyond the site, that could potentially be covered under the Broadform liability policy. But contaminated soil on the insured site and full remediation of the land would not be covered. These are not what Broadform liability is designed to carry, and that's generally where the biggest portion of the loss usually sits. So a common but important question often comes up. If Broadform liability policy has a pollution cleanup extension, why do I need a separate environmental policy? Well, the answer lies in the intention and depth of the cover. Simply put, the pollution cleanup cost extension under the Broadform liability provides limited, situational, and cleanup support, usually linked to liability or prevention of third-party loss. And this is assessed on a case-by-case basis. While the environmental site-safe policy is designed specifically for the environmental incidents, responds immediately, and covers up full cleanup both on-site and off-site without needing a third-party claim. So when we bring this all together, these policies are not duplicates, but are designed to work alongside each other. There may be some overlapping mitigation, but there is still a gap, especially around first-party environmental cleanup. And that's why relying on Broadform liability alone can leave businesses significantly exposed. So now I'll hand over to Willie to give us the reality of the claim.
Thank you very much, Alex and Yolanda and Shelley, for this opportunity, and welcome everybody. I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. Yes, these incidents, when they do happen, the reality in this claim was that ultimately a chemical facility caught light and was well alight, burned for several hours. There were various different types of chemicals. And when you look at the response to these types of emergencies, ultimately the fire event takes preference. And due to temperature and heat and risk of explosions, with drums flying all over the show, the fire department generally closes off the site. Makes it almost impossible for other emergency workers to enter or to get in and do the mitigation for the first party property. So as we've heard, that we've got two policies. You've got your emergency policy, which will respond, your environmental liability, and then you've got your general liability policies or Broadform policies, which will respond later on if you've got third-party damage. So where I think the difference would come in, and Alex, you can maybe just back over there, is that the emergency response or containment response of a Broadform policy will only activate if you could prove that you have actually saved third-party loss. So the moment that third-party loss is actually incurred, that portion of that policy is not going to respond because it was a failure. So they're not going to pay for that. You've got to be able to prevent that product from leaving. Now, in this case, it was impossible. Due to the heat, fire department wouldn't allow the guys to go in. They were spraying hundreds of thousands of liters of water. Ultimately, water carried chemicals out of the facility, contaminated properties. The second thing is that due to the heat of the fire, there were external properties damaged. There was a rail siding that was damaged, soil contamination, watercourse contamination, stormwater drains, and none of that could have been prevented due to the inability to actually get to the site. So ultimately, this now turns into a complete different service providers required. You've got your emergency response when it comes to the chemical cleanups and the chemical responses. You've got contaminated soil that needs to be removed, taken away for disposal. You've got contaminated water from the fire that's coming off, plus additional rainwater that needs to be contained and managed, which presented quite a challenge, because ultimately everything runs the path of least resistance, and that's down the stormwater system. And you've got to manage stormwater systems as it starts raining as well. So your environmental liability policy, or your initial response policy, is basically triggered and responds to legal legislation. So your legal environmental, or your Environmental Management Act, National Environmental Management Act, has got a section 30 in it, describes the method of response which is expected from responsible parties. Who is the insured in this case? He insures himself taking out that policy. And what you will have is that that guidance needs to be followed. Now, when EFI Global gets involved with these incidents, we make sure that we assist the insured in his legal obligations in order to mitigate any liability, legal liability going forward. What we also do during this whole process is make sure that we are able to quantify and identify how far this contamination has gone with the service providers that was appointed. Now, the service providers, I2 has got a panel of service providers when it comes to these policies that responds to emergencies of this nature. They are categorized, and we know exactly what capabilities these contractors have got. So we would sometimes, the appointment will be done by the insured. When we get to site, we will know who the contractor is that's on site. If the insured hasn't got a service provider, the policy, the initial policy will then dispatch, or we will dispatch a service provider to actually deal with this emergency. The broad form liability leaves us a little bit, because that has got to do with third-party damage. So that policy doesn't respond immediately. And that now pushes the ball back into the insured's hands to make decisions. And when those decisions are made, they do it out of ignorance, because they're not used to these types of incidents. They are now expected to give permission for millions and millions of rands to be spent, and they don't have that type of planning in their budget. So it puts the insured in a difficult situation, and it also puts the broker in a difficult situation, because I know that the broker has definitely tried to look after the client's needs, and there was discussions and the policies were solved, but the response of the policies are different. It's you can't always think you know how these policies are going to respond. So with your liability policy, your initial policy, or your environmental policy that activates immediately, according to the section 30, that gives you immediate response. So in order to work, contain, and clean up, and that policy responds actually to first party and third party. So it will respond immediately to assist, even to contain, and sometimes that small part of your liability policy is actually picked up by that initial policy to do the containment, do the cleanup on site. If it does leave, it then transfers that over to the third party damages and so. In this case, what we had was too little liability response, that initial response. So we had to basically allocate the two policies to the two portions, first party and third party. So we would say that we said that the liability policy would would respond to the first party property and cleanup and containment and stabilizing the incident on site. And we would then carry the additional costs over to the third party liability. But ultimately, third party liability doesn't respond immediately. It requires investigations, and all kinds of questions are being asked. The facts are run through or past lawyers, because the loss is usually a big loss. And we don't have mandate to actually spend money. So eventually, if the funds are running out on the environmental liability response policy, you sit back in the situation where the insured needs to make the decisions and act as if he is not insured. And he's going to have to run with this emergency incident and until his broad form liability is actually accepted. And then ultimately there's still the risk that the broad form liability is only going to cover certain aspects of this cleanup. It's not going to cover everything. Now, if you look at the contamination, there's a few things that needs to happen over here. We've got to restore the environment back to its natural state. In order to do that, you need to investigate. So there's sampling costs, there is analytical costs, there's chemical analysis that needs to be done on soil and groundwater. There is emissions that needs to be evaluated because of the chemicals that was stored in this warehouse and that was involved in the fire. There were additional risks identified, which changed the entire process. So where your building policy or your asset policy would pay a certain amount or allow a certain budget for demolishing, for instance, and site clearing, the chemicals that were involved in the fire formed byproducts. And these byproducts is actually very toxic. And the demolishing costs now through this process is going to increase by threefold due to the presence of the toxins on them. So it's not that you can remove steel and just recycle it. The process now is actually everything having to be washed, cleaned, and some of the waste will not even be able to go for landfill or land farming or so. It may have to go for incineration or heat treatment in order to get rid of the toxins, to decompose the toxins before it can. So it pushes the liability sky high. The next point is your remaining liability afterwards with the emissions. So during the fire, some of these toxins were emitted into the air. So the question is where did these toxins actually go to? Who did they impact? Who did they affect? And that still needs to be investigated. So when it comes to your initial policy and you've got enough cover, these types of analysis and sampling, which is quite costly on a claim like this, all needs to be done to determine what our risk is, what are we dealing with, how big is the area of contamination, and what do we need to do to protect the people that's going to be working on site and the people that was affected by the fire in order to mitigate further loss and further liability claims. And we need to just apply these policies and these costs to the various policies. So from a loss adjuster point of view, we've got to identify and we've got to acknowledge all policies that responds to these types of claims. We've got to engage with all the loss adjusters that's involved. We've got to engage with all the insurers that's involved in a claim like this. And we've got to understand where does the one policy stop, where does the other policy start, and where there's overlaps in order for us to be able to assist the insured in the best possible way financially. So although certain policies may have an overlap covering some third party, some first party, in order to give the insured the maximum cover on his available limits. We sometimes have to put a certain section of the claim into one policy and the other section into another policy, because in this case, the initial response policy was just not enough to deal with it. So the site now has to stand until we understand what the liability policy or the general liability or broad form policy is going to do. Is it going to respond, and in what way is it going to respond? And once we have clarity on that, we will be able to continue with that. With the exhaustion of the initial response policy, we're also sitting with additional analysis that needs to be done in order to determine the response and the risk of these toxins in the area. And for now, we are only able to, through mandate from the insured, to actually proceed with on-site sampling. But there's a huge external third-party liability that's lying over there that still needs to be investigated. And there's just there is no response at this stage from insured or insurers to say that we need to continue with that investigation in order to mitigate liability risk. So it puts the incident and everybody in a little bit of a catch-22 where we can't proceed with risk, and we can't actually continue with the incident until we understand the risk, because identifying the risk in the initial analysis that was done, we found that there's evidence of this, but we've got to now investigate it through specific analysis, and that specific analysis is not available in South Africa. So all these samples will have to be sent out to Europe, and we will need to do the analysis and the risk assessment through there. We also need to involve toxicologists and air emission specialists in order to determine the spread of the fire plume and the possible radius of contamination on the day that the fire actually took place. So limits are very important, and the understanding of how policies respond and the cover that is put onto these policies is very important, specifically when it comes to initial responses to emergencies and cleanup costs, because those costs can become significant. The majority of the costs that was incurred up to now was actually removal and disposal costs. Containment was done, but the removal and disposal costs of water and contaminated soil is significant on these types of emergencies. The demolishing of the building, the removal of the building contaminants, and so the removal of the chemicals that remained on site and the disposal of those chemicals doesn't even come close to the actual environmental cleanup that needs to be done on the site. So when we look at the legislation, like I've already said, that we've got, you've got your NEMA section 30. You've got, firstly, in NEMA, or the National Environmental Management Act, you've got section 28, which refers to your duty of care, which directly says that the responsible person or the polluter is legally required to prevent an incident like this, to minimize the effects, to remedy the effects of this incident, and it will all be at their cost. And that is why they actually take out this policy, or need this policy, is to actually be able to fulfill their duty of care under section 28. So this does not state that if you are insured, you must respond. If you are insured or not insured, you have to respond. It is expected by law from the insured to act on this emergency. This policy will respond. You don't have to lodge a claim or anything or so on. If you've got the policy will respond. If you don't have the policy, you still have to respond. So it is important that you have this type of emergency policy in place, environmental response policy in place, that will allow you or allow the insured to be able to have peace of heart and peace of mind that he's got assistance right from the beginning in dealing with these emergencies, and preferably that he's got enough cover to cover the removal and disposal costs, as well as dealing with analytical analysis and investigations and so that needs to be done in order to determine the risk on site and off site. And I'll get to that a little bit later between the two. So your Section 30 ultimately requires a notification to the Department of Environmental Affairs, and that would be local, your local municipality, it will be your provincial department, as well as the national department needs to be notified of this incident within 24 hours of the incident happening. A formal incident report is then required within 14 days of the incident happening. And that report consists of 11 points that needs to be there's 11 points that needs to be covered in there, and it's a standard report form that needs to be completed with evidence that needs to be submitted with it, and we assist the insured in completing those documents and also communicating with the departments, and then they ultimately have to take immediate steps. So you can't wait for insurer approvals, you can't wait for liability determination, third-party claims. You must act immediately, and this is what this policy assists with. Outside of the general liability, you need to have this immediate response of a policy that assists you with these types of claims. The Waste Act, ultimately, contaminated land. So when we talk about the Waste Act, there's certain processes where waste needs to go to, but there's also a Part 8 of the Waste Act that basically converts properties to contaminated land. So the moment you had an incident where the contamination is so significant that you are unable to clean it up immediately. So it's going to have a long-term impact on the environment, on people's health, on groundwater and the area around. It could be third-party properties. It could still be your own property, so first-party or third-party property. This land then gets declared contaminated land, and it's got to go through a process where you've got to do a phase 1 investigation, a phase 2 investigation, then it gets registered on the deeds. So the property actually gets listed at the deeds office as contaminated land. And as you then rehabilitate and remediate this, it will then change over to remediation. And once it's done, it will then change on the deed to remediated land. And that is what it will stay as. So uncontaminated, you've got a normal deed. As it goes through the phases of contamination, you will then it will then be listed as contaminated land. So your property value actually goes to 0. You are then responsible for the rehabilitation of that policy, of that land, and remediation until it is back to remediated land. And that is how it will remain. So there's always a liability that lies over there once it's been contaminated. So you've got to conduct your emergency site assessments, determine the extent of the contamination. You've got to implement a remediation plan. So you've got to give the government an idea of how you are planning and your budgets on how you're going to remediate this land until it is it can be registered as contaminated land. And then there is years and years and years of monitoring and sampling that goes with this. that will remain a part of this of this process and project. So, guys, in short, okay, this was a long story now, but in short, the question always is who's going to pay? Who's going to pay, and how are they going to respond? Which policy will respond? What is the impacts? Ultimately, we also have the discussion on the building and the contents. What happens now when prices goes up? Who picks up the costs? Because there's no environmental response. If a building needs to be demolished and the demolishing costs is 1.5 million rand for demolishing and clearing, and all of a sudden this liability now pushes that cost up to 5 or 6 million, who's going to pick up the difference between the policy response or the policy approval of 1.5 million and the 5 or 6 million rand that it's going to cost now? So there's always a difficulty, and these are the questions and the things that we need to look at. And so from my side, have the right policies in place, have enough cover. And there's always a question on what is enough cover. I don't know. There's these types of claims. These types of claims can run anything from the projected on this one is 20 million, but there's enough cover if you look at pure cover on the general liability policy. However, the general liability policy doesn't respond to the majority of that. It was supposed to lie with the initial environmental liability response policy, and there we're sitting with a huge problem where we've got to now convince and prove that the majority of the costs and so on is necessary in order to mitigate liability going forward. And so that's how we try and assist in cases like this. The thing is that you can't not do something because there's not money. At the end of the day, the insured is responsible, and we've got to act on behalf of the insured in a responsible manner and restore the environment back to its natural state. Somewhere the money is going to have to come from. The government's going to hold him liable. And if he's not going to respond to this, and he hasn't got a budget or he hasn't got insurance to cover this, he's the guy that's going to face the might of the law.
Thank you, Billy. Sure, this kind of scares me when you start looking at these kind of questions and circumstances around a claim. So I think what we know from the discussions that we've had up to now is that an environmental liability policy will respond immediately, doesn't need a legal, what do you call it? A legal term to look at it. The cover covers first-party cleanup first, and then third-party cleanup. If there is inadequate limit for these type of risks, there is a certainty that the insured themselves may have to cover some of this costs, the excessive costs, especially on the first-party side. We know from a broad form liability, it may respond later after a third-party approach. It mainly covers a third-party damage. It will cover first-party damage. It generally will cover it, but it excludes own site contamination, and we would look at it each on its own merit. So when you find yourself in this type of a gap and where we need to start looking at how we reduce the gap, the first-party environmental cleanup will be the best response initially. However, the law, we do believe that you need both an environmental liability policy and a broad form policy to make sure that you cover these gaps. The first-party cleanup for this claim, as Billy said, in terms of regulatory, it's mandatory. It can be expensive, depending on what chemicals are stored on the site. It needs immediate cleanup. And if, in a lot of the times on the environmental side, it is underinsured or sometimes not insured at all. So the law doesn't stop just because the insurance runs out. I think the key point is cover cleans up, even the environmental cover cleans up, even if it's on your own site. No one needs to sue you in order for the policy to respond. Cleanup is our legal obligation, and environmental policies are designed exactly for that. I saw that Lauren asked a question around what kind of penalties do we see where the client does not respond as required. So in Vinny's previous slide, in terms of the National Environmental Management Act, there is a clause in there that says polluter pays. So it is the obligation of the insured, whether they have money or not, to clean up. There are penalties that are imposed by the National Environmental Management Act, and they could lead up to 10 years imprisonment or 10 million rand in fines. So it isn't really a question of do they have enough money. They will take your assets. They'll do everything in order to make sure that you clean up, because it is a duty of care to put the property back in the position it was prior to the loss. So yeah, I don't think there is an option when you've got chemicals, especially hazardous chemicals. And the way that we look at hazardous chemicals is there's a international UN code. So we believe if a client has anything that carries a UN code, and they will know if the manufacturing of their product is on a UN code. If it is, you should have environmental liability. There are some where there's not a UN code, but we do still believe that you need to have cover in place. And those are things like milks, oils, paints that aren't part of the UN code. So they're water-based paints. We had a claim up in Botswana a while ago, and the client was a South African entity transporting in Botswana, and he had 11,000 25-litre drums of water-based paint. Unfortunately, that he hit an elephant on the road, and the truck overturned, and we had to clean up that. So in terms of legislation, it doesn't carry a UN code, but the cleanup of that was just under R1 million. And I think if we don't have the correct people in place, whereas an environmental liability policy has a loss adjuster, that's part of your product. It's part of the cover that we offer. Experts like Billy from EFI Global, that helps to speak to the authorities, helps the insured to complete a Section 30 when it comes to that, because a broad form liability policy doesn't necessarily have the loss adjuster that will assist with those kind of things. The other thing we need to also look at is what is excluded under a broad form liability policy. So if it's underground tanks, they're normally excluded on a broad form policy. Any motor is normally excluded under a motor policy. So you need to also look at those kind of exclusions. So while we say, yes, a broad form policy will bridge the gap, and there are grey areas, there's also exclusions under the liability policy, which we need to be very aware of. So yeah, thank you. Landa?
Thank you so much, Shelly, and Alex and Billy. As we come to the end of today's session, here are some key lessons for brokers to take away. Number one, environmental cover is not just for gradual pollution. It is most critical in sudden and catastrophic events. The biggest exposure is not always third-party liability. It can be first-party cleanup and always regulatory compliance. Sudden and accidental extensions in broad form liability helps, but only partially, and cannot fully never replace environmental liability cover. Limit selection is paramount, especially when you are evaluating the risk. Now, if this loss had no neighbors or no third-party damage, then would broad form respond? No, not at all. And that is exactly why environmental cover is not just an option. I do see that Lauren did also ask another question, Shelly. I'm not sure if you got to that.
Yes, I did see that.
Okay, so I do see another question that she just asked just now. She says, what if a client has a fleet of trucks or buses, for example, and they don't carry anything hazardous? but the truck leaks out hazardous fuel from their engine when there is an accident. Are they also responsible for cleanup costs, etc., in this scenario?
Yes, absolutely. So that would come under our side tank on the environmental liability. You can buy a standalone side tank cover, or you can take an environmental policy. And I think the biggest thing is with transporters, if they are carrying general goods, one thing within the carriage could be an environmentally UN code based, or it may be that two things that you're carrying may lead to a chemical reaction. We've had things before where baby formula actually explodes. If there's a fire in that vehicle, baby formula explodes. So yes, a side tank is definitely covered in terms of a policy. I know Lauren also asked, like, what other goods we know the normal ones are fuel, transporters, and chemical warehouses, but what other industries do we need to look at where it's not so obvious? I do believe that anything that can cause a hazard to the environment, not necessarily in its natural form, but if it's left like milk, we talk about milk often. If it goes into a riverbed and it sits in there and it starts fermenting, that becomes a hazardous good. Oils, if it contaminates with something else, will also carry that kind of stuff. I spoke about the paint, the water-based paint. Those things will definitely carry, would need to look at that. So it's really, can it cause damage to the environment? If it can, we believe you should have an environmental liability cover in place. I actually have a question for Willie. Willie, in an instance where there is a smaller limit on a environmental liability policy, and they've got a broad form policy for pollution cleanup extension, if there is any gaps in the policy, is it up to, would the insured then have to take that responsibility out of their cash flow, their daily cash flow, to cover any of those cleanups?
Absolutely. Shelley, yeah, they will have to take that financial decision. It's crucial that the insured, like I said, he will have to act as if he is not insured for that. And at the end of the day, that costs will have to be justified to the insurer. So if the general liability does respond, it will respond with certain pedals and say, this is what we respond to. And we will have to then fit all decisions and financial impacts that the insured then incurred during this process. We will have to then fit back into that policy and prove it to the insurer, and they will then cover it. But if there is costs that is not covered by that policy, then that costs will be his responsibility.
One thing I did notice in terms of the policy that we're discussing now, we had quite a lot of rainfall in that time that we started with the first party cleanup, and that exasperates cleanup costs because we're continuously going back. The contamination from the steelwork on the building kept on contaminating back down again. Then we would bring in the suckers and we would try to get it out, and it would come back again, and we were constantly on the back foot with the rain because it continuously kept on contaminating the area. So I think it's things like that we need to look at. We normally, in these kind of claims, would have additional costs for debris removal. Am I right, Willie? And PPE for these types of claims.
Yeah, that is generally that. Look, your debris removal and so on, that would fall first party, and that will form part of your building and assets and so and. So that needs to happen, but because of the liability impact, and that is where the major concern is lying over here, is that we are unable to actually give permission for any contractor to go on site and actually start with their work, because we haven't done the toxicology of the site. We've identified through our screening sampling that was done, and that there is toxins that is formed, and it is actually it's classified as POP. It's actually controlled as an international under the Stockholm Convention, these procedures and processes and cleanups are actually controlled through the Stockholm Convention, and it is persistent. So the contamination can have an impact for many years coming forward, and it can actually have health impacts for many years coming, and we need to mitigate that. But because the liability policy hasn't responded yet, we are now in a halt phase where, unfortunately, because the environmental liability response policy has been exhausted, we are unable to actually proceed and continue until we know that the insured makes a decision, or until the liability policy has actually responded. And so both of them are aware of the risk, both of them are aware of the response that is required, and we need the mandate from one of the two to basically proceed and continue with this cleanup. The meantime, cleanup costs is going to escalate because maintenance needs to be maintained. That water that runs off the site needs to be contained and needs to be disposed of.
Yes, absolutely. And then I just believe that because I run the environmental liabilities division, and there's always social media stuff, we straight away, whenever there's an incident on social media, we have an internal group, and everyone in the WhatsApp goes, is that ours? Is that ours? And what we find is that social media is the key to looking at all these environmental stuff. The National Environmental Management guys, that we've got, there's a division within it called the Green Scorpions, and the Green Scorpions are constantly on social media. We've had instances where they've actually arrived at the site before we've arrived at the site for a cleanup. So I know that Lauren, you had asked, but what happens if the insurer doesn't have the money for it? Sometimes it's out of their control. The Green Scorpions will get there. And the thing around Green Scorpions in the Section 30, the minute that the Section 30 is registered, we may not close a claim file without the Green Scorpions or the National Environmental Management Act guys signing off on that claim to say that we have remediated the property back to what it was prior to the loss. And sometimes that can be an additional, we need to put grass on the side because the road was, they had impacted soil underneath. And if we don't put back a certain type of grass, the soil will corrode again, and then it destroys the road surface. So there's different things that could actually take part that we would need to look at. And it's not just about cleaning up the spill of what the insured is carrying or storing on his premises. It's cleaning up the environment around it and the impacts of the environment around it. So I think that for me is very important. And we haven't really, and it's not really part of our business, but as brokers, and we'd like to inform you, I think the biggest impact outside of environmental and the broad form part of this claim was whether the broker has sufficient BI cover in place. I think that's also very important that they need to understand. Because really, I mean, in instances like this, if we're looking at a building that may not, that they may not be able to go into, even to remove the debris, never mind rebuilding it, they would have to look for alternative places to continue on with their operation.
Yeah, the big thing now is that remember that the impacts of this incident could have a very long-term impact, which means that if they are looking at moving back into this premises and rebuilding this premises, the rehabilitation and the remediation of the site may take the next 4 or 5 years to basically do. It may take the next 10 years until they declare the site safe for rebuilding. And ultimately, yes, the next option now with BI would be to actually find another premises where they can actually open and establish themselves and continue running, because they're going to exhaust their BI cover.
And in terms of this type of claim where there's heavy toxins in that, would it be deemed a brownfield scenario?
Absolutely. Look, it's basically it's contaminated land. It's contaminated land, but we've got to now go through the process of following the steps of meeting the Part 8. So it's a brownfields. Nothing can basically be built on it until it's been investigated and rehabilitated, and then we will be able to, or they will be able to rebuild and re-establish the site for use.
Andre, I see you've put a question in. If a client states that he uses non-corrosive chemicals when manufacturing cleaning chemicals and he does not want to opt for environmental liability policy, should I get this in writing? I do believe you should offer it, and it should be in your record of advice. It should be, environmental liability should be a section on any commercial policy to say that you have offered them this. Because we all know, we all went through COVID. I was a broker at the time going through COVID. Everybody said they didn't need that extension, the infectious disease extension, until COVID hit. And then everybody said, oh, but you as a broker didn't give it to me. I think it's pertinent that you add it. Every broker adds it into their record of advice going forward, that we have offered environmental liability cover, especially on any manufacturing business. There is a chance that anything within their product, and it's not necessarily, I mean, we've had places that make beauty products or shampoos, but in their manufacturing process, they use a hazardous chemical.
Yeah.
So
Shirley,
it can spill. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to just tie up on that. And so it's, sometimes the guys classify taking out liability policies when they have hazardous products, when a product is classified as hazardous. So the manufacturing of shampoos or toothpaste or food products or those types of things, none of that basically classifies as a hazardous product. But the composition and components that goes in is maybe not high enough to classify it as a hazardous product, but it's got an impact on the environment. It's not a natural product. Even spilling 5 milliliters of sugar into a watercourse, it will deplete oxygen out of that watercourse, and you've got a pollution ratio of 5 milliliters to 60,000 liters of water. So 5 mils of sugar will pollute 60,000 liters of water within 24 hours. Depleted from oxygen, microorganisms won't survive, organic materials is going to die off, and that is why you can't just wash down a road with Coca-Cola lying on it. You can't wash milk down the stormwater drain. You can't allow those products getting into a watercourse. It's polluting the watercourse. It is depleting the watercourse of oxygen, and everything that is living in it will die. And the impact is a snowball effect. You started off very small, and it basically just rolls off. You start seeing the impacts of fish dying and frogs dying and birds dying. And so that is far gone past the ability to rehabilitate that river also. So even any type of commodity lying next to a road, remember that the National Environmental Management Act states that it's if any incident that poses an unreasonable risk to the environment, to human health, or to property is classified as a Section 30 incident. And this could be a fire, an explosion, an ignition, a spill, anything that's got the potential to do that. So if you even have a truck that overturns with log poles on it next to the highway, it has to be cleaned up. You can't leave it there because the cleanup cost is going to cost more than the commodity on the vehicle. And we've heard this argument many times from insureds, brokers, and even insurance companies responding that way. That wood can stay over there because it's not a pollutant, and it's not. You have somebody stop over there to pick up that wood, and he gets killed, or he gets run over on the highway, crossing the highway or so, or they will lock you up. The insured is responsible to recover that load because it is creating an unsafe situation. It doesn't matter now what they say about the people that is stealing commodities and everything. It remains your responsibility. You've got to give the mandate to clean.
I know we had we had one where there were drums. It was toxic chemicals inside drums, and we had the weighball, which said, I think it was 7 or 8 drums, and we found 5 of them, and we had to go. I know that the cleanup guys had to go into the fields to go look for the others. And we found one in the fields, and then we were told that just down the road there was an informal settlement, and they had taken that other drum. And the cleanup providers were threatened by the local community that they couldn't come in there. And we actually had to get somebody to go in there with security because it posed a hazardous to the community. It was hazardous chemicals that could have been left inside there. So yeah, those things do. I think we're on time. But there is one more question. So I would like to quickly ask it if everyone can stay on for a few minutes. And Alex, this is to you from a claim side scenario. Let's say that the claim happens, response is good, everything contained and disposed of. But then years later, there are alleged health issues and a class action. Does the policy respond years later?
Okay, so I think I think it would be more or less looking at whether there's any prescription limits on it.
Yes.
Also, just like we say, the broad form liability policy is in fact in place for any third-party litigation. So we would then, in essence, pick it up should it be within the prescription limits. And I think as case by case, it would be on the merits of the matter. And yeah.
Yeah, and likewise on the environmental liability side, it will be the same, exactly the same thing. Yolanda, I'll hand over to you for closings.
Well, thank you guys so much for all that information. But I think we all know now that when cover matters, knowledge makes all the difference. So do you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday? I'm off to eat my blueberry ice cream, so bye.
Guys, can I please just let you know that your CPD, you don't have to register, it automatically gets done. And if we can please ask, there was a survey that went out, a broker survey that went out on our service levels. Please, if we could ask you if you haven't completed it, to complete it by Friday, we would really appreciate it. It goes towards us being top of mind, and you know that R2 loves brokers. So we ask, please, that if you can give us some feedback from the survey. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.